Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heads Up, the weekly podcast of the National Headache Foundation. I'm Dr. Lindsay Weitzel. I'm the founder of the Facebook group Migraine Nation. I'm a migraine strategist, and I'm a chronic daily migraine survivor. I am here today with Dr. Tim Smith. He is a regular here on Heads Up. Hello, Dr. Smith. How are you today?
Hi, doing well, thanks.
So Dr. Smith is the CEO of StudyMetrics Research. He does a lot of clinical trials in migraine. He is also the vice president of the National Headache Foundation. And he is here this week. You probably saw him last week. He's here again this week because we are doing part 2 of our series on emerging therapies. We are talking about all the new medicines that are coming out for us. And there were a lot of them last week. So go back and watch the episode if you didn't see it. We are moving on to the second half this week. So today we are going to be talking about the oral Gepants that are coming out. And there are 3 under investigation that we're going to be talking about. We're also going to talk about an IV anti-CGRP therapy. And then we're going to talk about a couple combination therapies, meaning when there's more than one medicine put together into one drug. And then we're going to talk about one therapy that's a little bit standoff on its own. Last week we talked about a whole load of therapies that didn't fall into these categories. So definitely go back and check that out. Before we start, I'm hoping Dr. Smith can tell us a little bit about who these medicines have been tested in and who they haven't been tested in.
Right, Lindsay. So all of the medications we're going to be talking about today and the ones we talked about last week have all been tested for patients with migraine, migraine with and without aura. We know that a lot of our viewership will be interested in other headache subtypes like cluster headache and post-traumatic headache or new daily persistent headache and others. And we wish we had data to share on these. Perhaps some of these treatments might be studied for those entities down the line, but as it stands right now, it's migraine. And the fact of the matter is there are between 30 and 40 million migraine sufferers, and that's are the biggest volume of patients with need. And it's not that we're trying to ignore these other very important headache subtypes, but this is just where we started, and we have data and potential indications for all of these treatments. Perhaps there'll be more work that'll be done. I know some is planned for some of these entities to look at other disabling headache disorders, but what we're going to be talking about today will just be migraine and migraine data.
Right. So when we use the word migraine, we want to make sure we give a shout out to, all the headache disorders National Headache Foundation reaches out to and represents all the headache disorders. The reason we are using the word migraine today is because that's who was studied in these cases. So we are going to start. We're going to talk about the Gepants first. So I think the best thing to do is to define Gepant. Tell us what Gepants are, please.
Sure. So the Gepants, they're called that because that's the sort of the suffix or the common part of the name for all of them. It's Ubrogepant, Rizatriptan, and Eptinezumab. So it's just like triptans or Sumatriptan and so on. It's kind of a funny sounding name, but that's, we didn't pick that. It's the scientific nomenclature that dictated that. So the Gepants are a class of drugs that block what we call calcitonin gene-related peptide. Many migraine sufferers who have kept up with the literature are going to recognize that right away. That's the infamous CGRP. And we know that CGRP is involved at all stages of migraine pathology production. So if you think of something that is involved in producing migraine, be it inflammation of the lining around the brain or the blood vessels or the swelling of the blood vessels or the enhanced pain transmission, CGRP is a major player in all of those areas. So naturally, if you block that effect, then you're going to see results in migraine. And that's what the clinical trials have borne out. Where people are most familiar with CGRP are the monoclonal antibodies that are marketed now. the Aimovig, Emgality, and Ajovy that are used as preventives. And so this Gepant class, at least the initial uses of the Gepants will be as treatments for acute therapy, that is to turn off a migraine that has started or is starting. And these are the differences. They will be orally administered. They're what we call small molecular weight entities, and that means you can give them by mouth and they'll get absorbed into the bloodstream, whereas the antibodies have to be administered by an injection. So the advantages of the Gepants as a class would be that they don't have any vascular activity. That means they don't cause blood vessel constrictions, so they would be safe for people with heart attack and stroke risk factors, or people with past history of vascular disease, old heart attacks, old strokes, those kinds of things, patients with that history. And there's about 2.5 million of them in the country that have migraine. So they're precluded from taking the gold standard, which is unfortunate. But now with the Gepants and some of the other treatments, they will be able to have a migraine-specific treatment and not just have to rely on NSAIDs and opioids and the like.
Okay.
So that's the story on Gepants, and we can talk about the individuals.
Okay, so that's our Gepant background. Let's start with our first Gepant, which is Ubrogepant. It's also known as UBRELVY. This one is already approved by the FDA. It's one of the few things we are going to talk about that's already been approved, and hopefully we'll see it in pharmacies soon. So please tell us just a little bit about that. You've already given us an overview, but what makes UBRELVY special?
So for UBRELVY, as you mentioned, it is FDA approved. It's passed muster as far as the FDA review is concerned, and the sponsor company, which is Allergan, just needs to get it into the pharmacies, which I understand should occur sometime next week or the next week. So people can look forward to having access to it. This is the UBRELVY molecule is going to be marketed in a tablet form. It's going to be available in 2 strengths, 50 and 100 milligram tablets, and it'll be for the acute abortive care of a migraine. That is a migraine that's coming on or has started. You can turn it off with a dose of UBRELVY. It can be repeated if you're not getting better after a couple of hours. And this has, as we mentioned, the advantages of being able to be used in patients who don't get results from triptans, or maybe precluded from taking triptans, or just had side effects from them. This will give us a lot of more flexibility and fulfill an unmet need that we still have despite the highly effective nature of the triptan drugs.
Okay, so that is one that you can go to your doctor and ask for very soon. We have that almost now. In a couple of weeks, it'll be available to us. And like UBRELVY, there's another Gepant called Rizatriptan, and it is an oral Gepant, and it's for the acute treatment of migraine. It is also up and coming, but it's not yet FDA approved. It is a little different in its delivery. Can you tell us what's unique about this one?
Yeah, so Rizatriptan, it's a very, another of the Gepants has the same advantages of, side effects and tolerability. Side effect profile is very, very low, but the thing that stands out that's a lot different for Rizatriptan is that it's going to be marketed in an orally disintegrating tablet. Mm-hmm. So this will be something that melts in the mouth, under the tongue, or on the tongue, and leads to a rapid onset of action for most people who take it. So all the advantages we talked about before, and the distinctive difference is it's only going to be available in 1 dose, 75 milligrams. The dose is 1 dose in 24-hour period, and rescue doesn't appear to be necessary. They have good data that goes out from 4 to 8 hours to 24 and 48 hours. So it looks like that could potentially, for many patients, will be a one and done dosing strategy. and all of the other advantages of the Gepant class. Very low side effect profile, very high degree of tolerability, and
it's also great for people with severe nausea because it disintegrates in your mouth. You don't really have to swallow it with water, correct?
Should be good. Yeah, it does not require water. I guess the other thing I'll mention about the Gepants, and this goes for the UBRELVY discussion as well, is that we don't, it doesn't look like there's going to be concern over medication overuse headache bound for this class. We don't have any data to suggest that's going on. I think they're going to have a more in-depth analysis of the long-term open label studies for both of those compounds that'll sort of address that issue a little bit more. But no cardiac side effects, no medication overuse headache side effects, no issues with the so-called serotonin syndrome. You know, a lot of advantages for the Gepants, and we're looking forward to having those out there and letting patients try them for the acute treatment of migraine.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move on. Both of those, UBRELVY and Rizatriptan, were for acute migraine treatment. We're going to move on to one that's for prevention. This one is still a Gepant. It's called atogepant, but this is for migraine prevention, and that makes it a little bit unique. So can you please tell us about atogepant?
Sure. So atogepant is it's different. It's sort of a chemically modified entity. The other Gepant precursor molecules, and the advantage is it's more specifically designed to be taken daily as a preventive, and that's the way atogepant has been studied. There are more studies ongoing. And we expect those will wrap up over the balance of this calendar year, perhaps, and be submitted for FDA consideration next year. The acute ones we mentioned, UBRELVY is already marketed or approved for marketing. It should be on the market within a week or two. Rizatriptan, I don't know if I mentioned, but it's before the FDA, and we expect approval on that at least by the month of February. Atogepant will be longer, and that's the preventive one that you just introduced. It'll be a daily medication for migraine prevention. High degree of tolerability, great results on liver enzymes and things like that so far. It appears to be highly safe. The effectiveness rates should be good, and there's some data that's been presented on some trials with it. So we'll just have to wait and see. Once those data have been submitted to the FDA, it'll be a year. So we're hoping before the end of 2021, we'll see that. And it blocks CGRP. It's a small molecular weight, so it's potentially could do the same job as a preventive by blocking CGRP. And then I'll just say the Rizatriptan molecule that we talked about for acute therapy,
right,
looking at a swallow tablet for that to potentially be used as preventive also. In their current scheme they're using in the clinical trials is every other day dosing.
Oh, okay.
But we'll see. That still has a little ways to go in the development process. But we could have 2 oral Gepants for acute therapy, and we could have a couple of oral Gepants for prophylaxis within the next couple of years as well. So pretty exciting stuff. We love the profile of these new medications. The safety and everything is going to be impeccable. So we're really excited about that.
Okay, that is exciting. So basically, just to review, because there is so much information here, basically what Dr. Smith just said is even though we introduced Rizatriptan, which will be available very soon, possibly as soon as the end of February, as an acute therapy, it is being tested also as a preventative therapy that you would only have to take every other day. Atogepant, which was the one we just talked about, will not be out as soon, and it is being addressed as only a preventive therapy. So the next one we're going to talk about is not a Gepant, but it does work on the CGRP pathway. It is a CGRP blocker, and what makes this one unique is it is delivered intravenously, meaning IV, but it is only delivered quarterly, 4 times a year. So and it also has really promising data. I love hearing about this one. So can you talk to us about Eptinezumab?
Sure. So Eptinezumab is,
Oh, I said it wrong. Sorry. Eptinezumab.
Eptinezumab is it's before the FDA, so the data has already been submitted, and we understand that they could make a judgment on that within the next month or two. So we're hopeful before the end of February there'll be an announcement made about this drug being approved. It fits into the category of CGRP monoclonal antibodies, so this would be in the same category with the marketed drugs of Aimovig, Emgality, and Ajovy. The difference being, as you pointed out, that this would be an IV administered medication, so patients would have to come to a center unless somebody could deploy a home IV service or something. That will be, we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But in the studies, the patients would come to the clinic and come in quarterly, every 3 months, get an IV started, get the medication infused over about 30 minutes or less, and then the IV discontinued, and they could, get up and walk out and drive home and go back to work or whatever else they wanted to do. It's highly tolerated, but has good numbers on migraine prevention, which is its main focus, and that's what the FDA is reviewing at this moment. And if it gets approved, it'll be for migraine prevention. But the interesting data I think you were alluding to is that patients that take an infusion of this medication, their likelihood of having a migraine on day 2 is cut by somewhere around 35% or more. So that means that for many patients, it kicks in that quickly. And we're used to the history of taking preventive medications that may take weeks or months to kick in and have their effect. And there will undoubtedly be some patients who will be better right away. And as we saw patients who came back and they said, I was better that first week. And we were going like, yeah, right. Just seeing that from a preventive medication, but it turned out that the statistical analysis showed it to be true. And so we're really excited about this. This could be something that could not only give patients good preventive care, but it may kick in right away. So patients that are having frequent emergency room visits or just can't breathe, they're using all of their acute medications regularly. They could potentially take an IV infusion of this and be immediately better with certainly within that day. And there's a study going on right now that's looking at effectiveness within 2 hours. So patients come in with a migraine going on and take the infusion. And if it works out, if the data proves that it's effective in that way, then they could potentially get relief within an hour or two, and then that would be maintained for 3 months. So they could headache go away, and then the subsequent occurrences of headache be much reduced. So we're pretty excited about it. The thing about the IV administration is 100% of the drug, the body where it's needed, none is lost. And so it's a very efficient way of doing it. There's no wastage of the medication, and it's highly predictable. So, some people you give them an injection or they take a drug by mouth, they may or may not get the right absorption, and there's a range of how much drug gets absorbed. With an IV administration, that 100% of that dose is getting to the bloodstream. That's exactly straight where it's going. Right. And it may be why we get those early onsets of results with the studies. But the same can be what we've seen with the other CGRP monoclonals, a high degree of safety, low degree of side effects, high degree of effectiveness in preventing migraine. They all will show up with this drug as well. So we're anxiously awaiting it getting to the market.
Okay. I do find that data very exciting, and you're right. I was talking about the short-term data. It's quick onset at 24 hours or possibly even sooner, people getting better. So I find that very exciting. So we're going to move on to a couple combination therapies. And what I mean by that is that in one drug, some companies have put 2 different medications together in order to combat different side effects or problems related to migraine. The first one is ASX07. And it is an oral medication, and it is Rizatriptan or Maxalt mixed with sort of like a superhero strength anti-inflammatory is the way I like to put it. So can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Sure. So it's, as you mentioned, Rizatriptan, which the active ingredient in Maxalt,
Mm-hmm.
A chemical called Meloxicam, which is in the marketed anti-inflammatory MOBIC is the brand name that it's in. And so it's kind of sort of, some of the viewers may be familiar with TREXIMET, which is a marketed combination pill of Sumatriptan and Naproxen.
Mm-hmm.
The triptan with the anti-inflammatory. So this is kind of a newfangled version of that concept. The difference being that Rizatriptan, a little different look, as it turns out from the triptan standpoint. Some people tolerate it better than Sumatriptan, and some people get better effects. So it's just another option. And the MOBIC, or Meloxicam, I should say, being the anti-inflammatory, boosts the effectiveness of the triptan. So it's like getting a combined drug effect, all in one tablet. The unique thing is that this tablet uses a patented absorption enhancer that the pharmaceutical company has discovered and has created and is trying to bring to the marketplace. And what that does is gets at least the meloxicam component of the tablet absorbed much more quickly, so it kicks in a lot faster. And as you mentioned, it's kind of like a super NSAID or a super ibuprofen kind of thing. So combining that with the Rizatriptan, at least in theory, and as we see in the study results, does lead to some better results. And I'll mention that, and people can look this up online because this study's been published. They've studied the combination drug not only against placebo, but against Rizatriptan or the Maxalt drug alone. And they studied it in a population of patients that had a history of being refractory to treatments. So these are people that don't respond well to the usual abortive medications. And what they saw was that the drug statistically, the combination drug statistically, their formulation of it outperformed not only placebo, but also Rizatriptan alone. So that's an interesting concept, and I think it stands the test against these controlled clinical trials. So that's good news, and it helps us have a little more confidence around how effective this might be for some people.
So we're going to move on to another one that's a combination medication. This one is called CLH1T. It is kind of cool because it's going to combat your migraine and your nausea is the goal. And so they put together a triptan and an anti-nausea medication.
Yeah.
So talk to us about this one really quick.
Sure. So yes, and this is marketed, or not marketed, it's a studied combination product that's being looked at by a company called Charleston Laboratories. Mm-hmm. What they are doing is looking at the studies have been completed, but the data is not completely out yet for us. But some early results have been reported. And what it is a combination of Sumatriptan, or the active ingredient in Imitrex, and a compound called Promethazine, which is the active ingredient in Phenergan. And many of our viewers will have used anti-nausea medicines to treat the nausea component of their headache. Mm-hmm. Migraine sufferers who take an anti-nausea medicine like that can get some partial pain relief as well. So combining it with the triptan, makes a lot of sense. It's kind of two of the major symptoms or more with one dose. The other thing that's unique about the formulation is this company also has an absorption enhancer that they've incorporated into the anti-nausea medicine, which enables them to use a smaller dose and get better blood levels with it. And I'll also mention that most of us who practice headache medicine know that if you give an anti-nausea medicine with a triptan or another medicine, sometimes it helps the anti-migraine drug itself get absorbed better. We know there's a lot of what doctors call gastric stasis or gastroparesis, which means the stomach just kind of gets lazy and goes to sleep and doesn't want to function anymore. That's where the nausea and other symptoms come from. But if you use the nausea medication along with it, it can help overcome some of that and enable the Sumatriptan version as it pertains to this drug to get into the bloodstream a little more efficiently. And then you've got the anti-nausea effect too. So we're hopeful, and it looks like that's, on track to be approved sometime in 2021.
So we have one more medicine we're going to talk about, a older medicine. It's been around a while, called celecoxib. But they've changed it a bit for us, and now it's being tested in people with migraine. It's called DFN-15. Please tell us what's new about this one.
Sure. So the company that has done the research and tried to bring this to market basically took that celecoxib molecule, which is a marketed anti-inflammatory. It is available in a swallow capsule. But what they did is they made a liquid dose, kind of like a syrup version that patients can take. And it being in that liquid form, it gets absorbed more rapidly, so you can give a lower dose. And again, it's like a super ibuprofen or a super NSAID type medication. And if you can, studies all will show from the old Cambia drug that's on the market and others, that if you can get an NSAID into the system quickly and efficiently, for many migraine sufferers, people who experience migraine, they'll get that result within 2 hours or less. It'll take that headache away or cut it in half. And so it will have a role, and it'll have a high degree of safety and effectiveness. The company that sponsors this has already performed their 2 pivotal trials, and their data is before the FDA and being considered. So I expect we'd have a judgment on that within the next year. So by this time next year, we should have that as another treatment option. As a person who has migraine myself, as someone who has worked in a migraine clinic for many, many years, done all of the studies on all of these new compounds, it's a pretty exciting time. And I've been super happy to be able to talk about these things today, and hope that people will, keep a watchful eye for these things, and hopefully, talking about them, we'll be able to, they can make some more informed decisions about what's coming out and what to talk to doctors about.
So I would like to say that I had chronic daily migraine from the time I was 4, and it wasn't until I was 17 that I was offered a medicine. And that was a triptan, and thank God it was there, but then I wasn't offered anything else for God only knows how long. So this was a lot of information, these 2 episodes put together. And I am so grateful that it was a lot of information. We are so lucky now, because, I went most of my life with nothing to treat my migraine. And now we are coming up with so many things. And so if you're a person that's gone forever with nothing that works for you, I bet that time is coming to an end. I bet there's something here that's going to help you. And that is just so exciting. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring this episode to an end. I'm going to really quickly review that today. That was 3 Gepants we talked about. 1 of them dissolved, and 1 was for prevention, and 2 were for acute treatment of your migraine. And then we had an IV therapy that was a CGRP blocker that we talked about that is up and coming. And then we talked about 2 combination therapies, and an oral version of an old drug that was celecoxib, that's an anti-inflammatory that is being studied for migraine. All of these things are so exciting. So thank you so much for joining us, all of you, and thank you, Dr. Smith. And please join us next week on Heads Up, the weekly podcast of the National Headache Foundation. Bye-bye, everyone.